Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to the reading for Weirdscapes and Otherworldly Anthology. Thank you so much for coming and supporting the writers in your life. And if not, I know we advertise it around. If you don't know anybody here too, that's great. Thank you for coming and supporting indie publishing. Um, Weirdscapes is has been a very fun project. It is a collection of short stories that include, well, as the title says, weird and otherworldly settings. Um, I helped pick all of these pieces that made it into this collection and wrote the foreword. My name's Kyle Thompson. It's hard to say I'm usually anywhere these days because I move around a lot. I'm currently in Anchorage, Alaska. Um, and I think this collection for me was kind of a good representation of what speculative fiction can do by sort of twisting our reality or presenting a new reality for us. I think these fantasies can help kind of guide us to deeper truths by taking us by the hand and pulling us through spaces and times which might only nominally resemble our own, but they still give us a chance to look at questions like why does human connection so often sit in close proximity to hatred and violence? Or how are we meant just let each other go after spending our whole lives fostering joy with our loved ones? Sort of these deep and hard questions that we can dig at through fantasy, kind of through a relative safety of fantasy. So that was kind of my approach to picking the stories that are in here. I was so impressed. I was just saying before we got started here, so impressed by all the submissions we received. It really was a lot of tough choices. I really enjoyed reading so many new and emerging authors and different perspectives. It really was kind of a delight to go through. We had dozens of submissions. I don't know if I actually have the final number, but it really was a pleasure. Um, just to talk really quickly about the cover of Weirdscapes, we have the cover comes to us courtesy of an artist coming out of Aotearoa in Australia. Her name is Lix North. She does hyper realist and surrealist works. It's really very impressive. Thank you, Naomi, to watch her work. If you're on Instagram or anything on social, you can look her up on via her website too, which we link to from the Ink Alchemy site. The way she really works with fine brushes to paint these beautiful pieces with oil and aluminum canvas is just super impressive. I went and watched a few of them yesterday as I was getting ready to give this talk. Um, so thank you very much to Lix for providing us with such a beautiful cover that I think actually ties really well into one of our pieces. Um, Also, a little bit about Ink Alchemy, which is our publishing imprint. It is a publishing platform for skilled and emerging authors that welcomes authors and characters of all identities. It operates out of Ithaca, New York. Our sort of fearless founder and leader, Naomi, is here, and she is part of the collection. We really appreciate the work that they do. Please check out their website for I think we're up to this is our fourth collection that's come out of Ink Alchemy, right, Naomi? Yes. So yeah, there are four collections that you can take a look at, all of which are fantastic and a lot of fun. Okay, so how this is going to work today. I'm going to take a minute to just introduce each author before I turn it over to them to read a small portion of their work, about 5 to 10 minutes. Not everyone could make it. I'm going to go through in order. If somehow I miss you, because this is the first time I'm seeing some authors, please stop me and yell at me, and we'll get you in to read a section of your story. I think I have everyone identified and here, but if I skip your story by mistake, please let me know. Um, and then we'll take a quick break at the end for a Q&A section if anybody has any questions for the authors or about how the writing process works. Feel free to jump in. And then we'll wrap up. So that's the plan for today. Um, all right. So our first author, I think that's here, is Augusto Luis Facchini, and I hope I've gotten that right. Um, Augusto is a Brazilian American writer residing in Ithaca, New York. He has a PhD in fiction from SUNY Binghamton and has taught creative writing at Ithaca College. His work has also been previously published in the Rio Grande Review. Augusto will be reading from his story, Orphan. Augusto, the show is yours.
All right, thank you so much. I'm Augusto Facchini. The story that I have, Orphan, is uh, in no secret inspired by uh, the passing of my father January this year. And this story follows Orphan is the play on the um, eponymous character Orpheus from the Greek tragedy who travels to the underworld. In this story, the main character travels to the Greek underworld and uh, passes through several legendary beings that represent the various stages of grief, like denial, bargaining, acceptance. So I'll be reading from the acceptance section of the story. Beyond the gate, the space above the black earth was a cosmic nebula of bluish purple and crumbled statues of onyx. Black stone stood sentinel among avenues of tone gray ash. Stately edifices, accented by monumental columns, appeared as somber as mausoleums. The dead shuffled in their solemn procession along the street towards a great hall in the epicenter of the necropolis. In their haunting whispering filled the air. Orphan walked beside the marching line of the condemned, searching for his father. Still, no one would speak to him or acknowledge his presence. It was as if the deceased, he was a true phantom, invisible and unheard, only a spectator into this strange world. He went along for how long he did not know, for in that place there was neither light nor shadow, nor did he feel weariness, hunger, or thirst, and the ashen road seemed to continue on and without end. At last he came to a crossroad where the roads converged, and at the center, upon a stone pedestal, rose a colossal statue of three women conjoined together, each facing a different direction, and their hands held serpents, torches, keys, and other objects Orphan did not recognize. All around the base of the pedestal grew stalks bearing ghostly blossoms of white asphodels. He gazed up at the idol in wonder. The eyes of the face towered above him and seemed to look down with disdain. With little hope, he held up the photograph as high as his arm could reach and called out above the din of whispering, "I'm looking for this person," he bellowed, afraid his voice would not reach the figure's dizzying stature. "Have you seen him pass?" To his astonishment, the statue replied, "No one here is a person anymore, mortal," spoke one of the stony faces, austere in expression. Her voice was a hollow echo in the dismal quiet. "No one here is—" "I know," he called again. "No one's a father or a mother or a brother or anything. I've been told already. But I seek this one anyways. Can you help me?" The statue was silent for a long time. Orphan stared, awaiting a reply, but none came, and the sculpture, if indeed it was a carving of stone, was as unmoving as the grave. So at last, Orphan relented. "Okay, thank you anyway," he said, and began to slink away.
Uh-oh, we might have lost Augusto.
He's been having Zoom problems. I think he'll be right back. Oh, there he is. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh no, how long was I gone? I didn't even know it crashed.
You just crashed. So you were only gone for I don't know, 10 seconds maybe.
All right, I'll just pick it back up. Um, the statue was silent for a long time. Orphan stared, awaiting reply, but none came. And the sculpture, if indeed was a carving of stone, was as unmoving as the grave. So at last, Orphan relented. "Okay, thank you anyway," he said, and began to slink away, but stopped again when the figure replied. "Haughty is a mortal who demands answers from the divine," one of the faces said. Yet more haughty is a mortal who enters the realm of the dead to seek out here one interred, spoke another. Do you believe you alone suffer in the wake of death? Said the third. Are you so misguided to think none of the other dead here left behind sorrow in their crossing? The faces continued speaking in turn, one after the other. Orphans circled the pedestal, observing them from below, and their voices rang out in sequence, permeating the space around him. Or is so great your hubris that you believe you alone can undo what no other mortal before you ever has? It's just that everything is wrong now, Orphan called, the pace of his orbit becoming more frantic and erratic. It's not as it used to be. Fool! Arrogant folly! Obstinate disregard! The ground seemed to tremble with their accusations, and Orphan stumbled headlong, struggling to maintain his footing. He lurched forward in his circling, flailing his arms to keep from falling. What if I trade places with him? He called, regaining some balance, but now striding with a desperate and unsteady gait as he made his circuit. Stay here in his stead. Could he go back? Do you dare presume that none before have this same bargain offered? Please, he pleaded. He was now in a mad dash around the trimorphic Goliath. There is no bargain, mortal, no measure of wealth, no pact or treaty, no service or penance. There must be something. His legs were vaulting before him, and the earth shook again, and he became tangled in his own limbs and went sprawling to the ground. Nothing, the three said at last all at once. This reverberated in shockwaves, rang out like the toll of a bell, shook the foundations of buildings, and lingered in the air, a vacuous echo, definitive in its finality. Finally, Orphan balled up his fist and hammered it into the earth, weeping useless into the crown of his own arm. Nothing, nothing, the sound resonated. I'll stop there.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Augusto. Um, okay, I think next, uh, I'm dodging around some of my question marks if people were coming or not. We have the story Overlapping, which is by Odin Meadows. Odin is a neurodivergent and queer author of weird horror, surreal fiction, and strange poetry, a slow fashion enthusiast, phylogeny nerd, and possible cryptid. He received a BA in English from Yale University as a first-generation graduate and now lives in the Midwest with his husband and two dogs, not too far from the small town where he grew up. Odin has asked that his story be read by another author that has worked with Ink Alchemy in the past, Keegan Young. Keegan is a systems-impacted fiction writer, poet, who earned 2 degrees while incarcerated. He works with systems-impacted people in the community, and he performs poetry at local open mic nights in Ithaca, New York. Keegan, your show if you're ready to read to us from this story.
Okay, thank you very much. Again, I'll be reading. Also, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Thumbs up if it's good. Okay, cool. All right. So, Overlapping by Odin Meadows. Zeph crashed into the couch with a gleam in his eyes that could only mean mischief. Grinning ear to ear, he pulled the little baggie out of his pocket and flicked the 2 purple pills inside. His boyfriend, August, feigned a stare of stern disapproval, but soon a smile broke across his face. It was their weekend off. They had time to retreat for a while. It's less like a trip and more of an adventure. At least that's what Dan said, Zeph explained as he placed the tablet under his tongue, wincing from the bitterness. What is that even supposed to mean? Is that his new tagline or something? August's face scrunched up as he popped the pill in his mouth. No, I don't think so. Zeph leaned back into the cushions. He's no marketer. He just said it's weird, kind of a little like Cat, but different. It's supposed to take you somewhere else, but like... His voice faded out into a whisper as his eyes glazed over and his head lulled to the side before collapsing on the couch. August started to say something, but the words got caught in his mouth, and the world blurred around him. His head hung heavy on his shoulders, and suddenly it was difficult to hold himself upright. He slumped into the recliner as vivid colors streaked across his vision, crashing into the walls. Tiny lines split into hairs that slowly constructed the outline of a door, then a wall. Frozen in place, his heart thumped in his chest as the dilapidated hallway materialized around him. A feeling like electric menthol tingled over his skin. Every muscle was clenched, His throat squeezed shut while his lungs banged against his ribcage, pleading for air. The final details solidified, and then whatever had a hold on him released its grasp, allowing him to finally pick himself off the floor. Zeph, August called out after sucking in a long breath. His heartbeat was returning to normal, but a creeping sort of dread wound up his spine. It was dark, but just enough light drifted through the corridor to see where he was going. There seemed to be no source. A flat coat of dim light covered everything, leaving no shadows. The hall stretched out into the distance, gradually disappearing into a fog of darkness. He could see maybe 10 feet in either direction. The paint on the walls was chipped and cracked. Several tiles were broken along the floor, and a few of the doors were peppered along the walls, hung broken off their hinges, opening up to nothing but an even deeper, cooler darkness. Sticking to the at least somewhat visible hallways, August picked a direction and began walking. He'd bump into the occasional 90-degree turn or forking path, but despite walking for hours, and never felt like he was nearing an exit. His mouth was dry, his feet were tired. He could have been walking in circles for all he knew. Everything looked the same. It was dusty and broken down everywhere he looked, and he couldn't shake the thought that he'd end up withered, dead, and flaking away just like the wallpaper. The halls were quiet, mostly. He could hear himself breathe. Each footstep echoed down the hall towards oblivion. Here and there, however, he began to hear little noises, a scratch, a tap, a knock. At first, he assumed it was his mind playing tricks. Something would rasp against the wall, and despite seeing no signs of life, he'd tell himself it was a bug or a mouse. Then, something knocked twice in quick succession. He could no longer deny it was the sound of someone tapping their fingers on the other side of the wall, approaching one of the open doors, tap by tap. August sprinted past the dark void, refusing to meet whatever it was, refusing to look back. He turned a corner and froze. Just down the hall, leaning out of one of the open doors, was a gaunt face with dark holes for eyes. He turned around and ran in the other direction. Something banged against the wall right next to August. He jumped but kept running. The bangs only continued, following him through the corridors as he ran. The banging on the walls soon filled the hallways with a cacophony of hollow duds. August came to a dead end. The banging became even louder, surrounding him entirely. He sank to his knees, covered his ears, and cried in the fetal position for what felt like hours. "Are you okay?" A hand touched his shoulder, and August jerked his head up to see Zeph, a worried look strewn across his face. He yanked Zeph into a tight hug as his cries died down. "Bad trip?" "Yeah," August moaned. I don't know. I was stuck in a hallway. There was no end. I couldn't find an exit, and there were people, but not people. There was something on the other side of the walls. They wouldn't stop." "Shh," Zeph rubbed August's back. "It just took me to a weird-ass forest. It was pretty chill." He kissed the top of August's head. "I'm sorry it wasn't fun for you. Dan said you can sometimes hallucinate others, but I guess I assumed they'd be peaceful." He let out a dry laugh, and August nodded his head. It was dark. He checked the time. Almost 2 a.m. "Yeah, I guess not." August forced a chuckle and wiped the tears from under his eyes. "I think I just need some rest." The next weekend, Zeph came home from work with another set of pills. He pulled the baggie out with a sheepish grin, and August's eyes widened in fear. "Again?" he asked. Zeph sort of shrugged his shoulders and nodded. "I had fun last time." His eyes fell to the floor. "It's okay if you don't want me to do it." "No, it's fine." August took a deep breath. "I just didn't think I won't be partaking this round. I'm good. This one's not for me, I don't think. I'll stick to weed for the night." He laughed, but Zeph bit his lip. Really, it's fine." "Okay." Zeph finally smiled for real. "I'm gonna go get comfy," he said, placing the tablet under his tongue. He kissed August on the cheek, and curled up on the couch. Within moments, he was transported to some metaphysical forest, and August was alone in a quiet living room. Zeph remained in that position until well after the sun went down. His breaths were deep but consistent. August tried to speak to him a few times, but Zeph never reacted. Lost in his world, his eyes darted back and forth underneath his eyelids. August spent his evening watching TV. Not long after midnight, Zeph shot up from the couch. August jumped in his seat, but Zeph's eyes were lit up with excitement. "That was crazy!" He spun around until he saw August and ran up to him, grabbing him by the arms. "I don't even know how to begin to explain." I continued like right where I left off. I got to really explore this time. It was crazy. There was so much weird shit. I saw the other people too. I tried to speak to them, but they kept running off into the bushes. He spoke like electricity coursed through his veins as he explained the mysterious runes he discovered in the forest. August did his best to keep a smile on his face, but as Zeph laid out his theories on the meanings of the strange symbols, an uneasy feeling gnawed at the back of his mind. The following weekend, Zeph took the other pill. He asked August first, but he didn't feel like he could say no. Zeph had already bought the pill and he wasn't going to take it, so he tried not to think about it too much. Zeph sank into the couch, explored the depths of the forest for hours, and came back to reality later that night. It still made August uneasy, but he was thankful for it to be over. He didn't expect Zeph to show up the next weekend with a baggie of at least 50 pills. What the fuck? August hissed through his teeth, trying his best to stifle his knee-jerk reaction. I didn't think you were going to buy more. Oh, Zeph grinned, but his eyes looked guilty. I'm sorry. Why did you get so many? August shook his head. Dan cut me a good deal, he shrugged. It's cheaper to buy in bulk. No shit, that's how all drugs work. August rubbed his temples. So, is this becoming your new lifestyle? Is this just your thing now? No, Zeph scratched the back of his head. It's not like that. I'm not hurting anybody. Why does it matter? It doesn't. Not really. August sighed. He hated to hurt Zeph's feelings, but it still worried him. The occasional nightmare of the endless hallway continued to haunt him. I just don't want to lose you. It's not like I'll be going in after you if you get lost in there. Besides, I get lonely while you're off on your adventures. Don't worry, Zeph kissed August on the cheek. I've got a plan for that, he said with a wink, and placed another tablet under his tongue. He sank back into the couch, drifted away. August's chest flooded with dread. After a few months of weekly adventures, August got used to the routine. He spent most Saturday evenings alone, watching over Zeph as he disappeared for hours. One night, however, in the middle of his weekly excursion, while August was streaming some cheesy movie, Zeph began to stir much earlier than normal. August? He moaned. August paused the movie and walked over. Zeph's eyes were wide open and darting around the room. August? He asked again. I'm here, he responded, and Zeph's eyes shot straight towards him. I did it. His eyes stared with an intensity that made August uncomfortable, never blinking, almost bulging. Did what? His voice was shaky. It's crazy. Zeph spoke in a quick, whispery burst. I found myself. I found me. And here. I found them both. I'm now both. I'm both. What do you mean? August sat next to him on the couch. His eyes kept darting in random directions, but every few seconds he would meet August's eyes. I'm overlapping. Zeph's voice flattened into a monotonous drone as he concentrated on his words. I followed the runes. They brought me to room, a deep room in the forest, and I found myself. I saw myself curled up on the couch. I lay down in the same position, and it took a while, but now I can overlap. I can see both. I can see the forest. I can see you. It's all happening at the same time. That's great, August said through a forced smile. Zeph nodded along, too out of it to notice the apprehension in his voice. Yes, I'm so excited. I wonder. He trailed off, moving his head in circles as he looked around the room. Can I? He wiggled his leg and then laughed. I can. His eyes followed, somehow wider, even further as he flung his leg off the side of the couch, almost kicking August in the face. It took a couple of attempts, but he was finally able to get himself into a sitting position. He patted around on the cushion until he found August's hand, then clenched it tight. What are you doing? August asked. But Zeph
I think we might have lost Keegan. I
You
was like,
know,
I can
like
hear the people
you
moving.
know, they always say that the modern meetings, modern Zoom meetings are like having a seance. Are you
Yeah.
there? Can you hear us? Give us a sign if you can hear us.
Well, they always say you should end like on a cliffhanger, right? So maybe
That's
this is a
right.
good place to stop anyway.
Yes. Um, okay. Well, yeah, that was quite the cliffhanger mid-sentence. I think we were reaching near the end of that segment anyhow. Thank you so much to Keegan for reading Odin's story. Up next, we have a story by Leah Erickson Chrysalis. Leah is an award-winning author of the novels The Brambles, Blythe of the Gates, The Gilded Lynx, and The Vesper Bell. Her short fiction has appeared in many magazines and journals in print and online, including the Brussels Review, The Fabulist, Pantheon Magazine, the St. Anne's Review, Eclectica, the KGB Bar Literary Journal, the Coachella Review, and many, many more. She lives in Newport, Rhode Island with her husband and her daughter. Leah, are you ready to take over here? Maybe.
Can you hear me now?
There we go.
Oh, wonderful. I'm just happy to be here. I had technical difficulties myself in the beginning. I haven't done Zoom since COVID, so I should have done a practice run, but made me feel like I was late to my first day of school. But if you can hear me, I'm very happy.
Yes,
I'm
we
reading
coming in clear.
excerpt from my story, Chrysalis. Kind of a dark literary magical realism slash body horror story um, about two eccentric sisters, fashion designers. I'll just say one transmogrifies into a moth. Not to give you a spoiler, but anyway, I'll begin. Kept her eyes trained on the sleeve, the narrow white sleeve, which she had spent hours sewing the beads. The pattern of the beading was one she had used before in her pieces. When people saw it, they usually said, "Oh, lightning," or "tree branches." But they never guessed the true inspiration, neurons, branches of dendrite seen through an electron microscope, like spiky black coral suspended in glowing amber. Sharon had seen a picture of them in a science magazine while sitting in the dentist's waiting room. They never even called her name. They'd forgotten all about her, but she was too shy to say anything. She'd sat staring stolidly at the magazine for about an hour until she quietly ripped the photo out and took it home, where she tacked it into the inspiration board over her designing desk. The dress itself was high-necked, close-fitting, made of ecru satin with an overlay of raw silk. The top half of the dress was very structured, but towards the bottom the silk was strategically hand-ripped, elegantly ruined. The short train in the back was softly tattered, and the beaded neurons, rendered hugely on the skirt, began to disperse and vanish, as if the beads had come unstrung and were dropping off one by one. Slowly, reluctantly, Sharon slid her eyes from the sleeve to the face. The bride-to-be was looking straight ahead into the full-length mirrors, but for a glancing moment her eyes touched upon Sharon's. "Your work is so unique. I mean, this dress looks like it was dug up from a grave, but in a good way?" The girl's voice was high and flat, and it echoed in the high-ceilinged front room of the design studio. She was a well-known influencer, a content creator, though Sharon still did not know what that was. "What are the beads made of?" And here Sharon drew a mental blank. Her mind was spluttering, clutching for the word she couldn't remember. Why did this keep happening to her lately? Was it common for people to lose their memories at 65? She could almost grasp the word, then it would slither away. Her face began to flush pink with embarrassment until the word, on its own bidding, at last fluttered into her brain. Vertebrae. These beads were created from the vertebrae of deep sea fish. They have a particular sheen. I custom ordered them from Shanghai because I found, compared to, say, mother of pearl. Oh my God, I knew you would say something like that. The girl, who at first seemed humorless and imposing, now clapped her hands delightedly like a child. "You and your sister are so goth. Are you twins?" "Are we?" "No." "Well, I guess maybe I just imagined it, because how goth would that be?" But she did not wait for an answer. She wandered the showroom, pausing to finger a wispy transparent dress in a pale blue hanging by itself on a brass hook on the wall. The silk! How do you make the silk look like that? I weave the silk myself from my own silkworms. Then I bury the silk and exhume it. Sharon always wore a stiff smile when talking to the clients. It was a strain talking to these young people who seemed so opaque, their words barbed in irony. She always had the terrible feeling that they were laughing at her. She and her sister Viv had designed for 40 years, always in the same building with the name of their label, Esme, frosted onto the glass of the transom. 40 years. Just the two of them for so long. They're rarely interacting with the outside world, living a miniature life, but not necessarily an unhappy one, she thought, until the Women's Wear Daily article broke them out. The two mysterious sisters living in genteel eccentricity create works of art. The Esme dress is an imaginative construct, delicate but complex, its textures and trimmings expressing emotions that are unutterable. Now that they were famous, it was like opening a sealed vacuum chamber, the rush of fresh air causing an explosion, and there seemed to be no going back. Oh, well, no one else does work like yours. It's art, really, truly one of a kind. You and your sister are hot. I just saw one of your dresses on that new singer, Liliana Vex. You know, that sad girl singer. Everyone thinks she's mood, all tragic poet aesthetic and all, but I think she's fake. They say that she's striking, but I saw her at the Chateau Marmont once, and she had a face like a pig fetus. And anyway, she had arrived at the showroom accompanied by an assistant, a young woman with short brown hair and a small, fixed smile, who now moved deftly into action, her movements precise and efficient as ballet. When the arrangements were made, payment tendered, and the dress slipped into a garment bag, they left. The showroom was quiet again. Sharon felt the spark of a headache begin behind her left eye. Her sister, Viv, emerged from the back room, from which she had been covertly watching the whole scene. You know, when people say they want something unique and exquisite, usually they don't really mean it. She said this in a strong declarative voice, then paused a beat, staring into Sharon's eyes as though challenging her to argue. Though her lips were always painted a stark red, her eyes were nakedly raw-looking, transparently blue, piercing. Viv had always been and always would be the eldest by 2 years. Sharon was the first to look away with a sigh. Sometimes I think I don't want to do this anymore, Viv. Do what? Well, this. Client meetings, sales reps, always having to smile. I'm not even good at it. Sometimes I think I should go back to school. And study what, pray tell? I don't know. Maybe neurology, a life science. I want to know more about life. Life? Viv looked at her, really looked at her. For just a moment, her expression was blown open and vulnerable, scared. Then she blinked 3 times rapidly, and it was like a curtain coming down again. And she said, you and your ideas, like when you ran away to Italy in college to work on an archaeological dig, to blow dust off caveman drawings. Remember that? Then you got infatuated with a local boy and thought you were in love. Good thing your family reeled you back in, or I don't know what would have happened. At least now we can just laugh at it. Anyway, Everything will be okay. You're just tired. That's 10 minutes. Mhm.
Thank you so much, Leah.
You're welcome.
Okay. Next up, I will be reading from my story, Old Light and Other Lies. I'm a writer, crafter, and miniature painter, daylighting as a software developer, currently living in Anchorage, Alaska. I live with my wife, Kim, three hyperactive herding dogs, and a grumpy black cat. We go on adventures whenever possible. This story is kind of a spy thriller, but that veers off into magical realism pretty quickly. Um, and so far, I'm going to be reading from the middle. The protagonist, Sam, is a U.S. spy. She's arrived at the U.S. consulate in Amsterdam after something went wrong the night before to debrief. She was searched by a Marine guard named Anderson. She felt some sort of stab at the back of her neck and then was escorted to the interview room with her handlers, Turner and Miller. She was feeling sick and ran into the bathroom, and that's kind of where we will pick up, is right in there. My eyes couldn't be trusted. I squeezed them closed and tuned to all my other senses. Trying to make sense of anything, I needed to find the door to the bathroom. I needed out. I needed a hospital. Worse, I needed Turner. I needed Miller. Hell, I'd take Anderson and her jabbing fingers. Something was seriously wrong. No way out on my own. I listened carefully for any hint of noise. Maybe I could hear Turner and Miller talking about me on the other side of the door, or the tap of the bathroom was sure was still on. Cold water still shushing into the sink. There, it sounded way too far off, but there it was, the noise of water flowing into the sink from the tap. I must be on the floor. I must have hit my head. Did Turner and Miller not hear me fall? Eyes still closed, I felt around. Smooth, cold tile. Yes, I was on the floor. I gingerly pushed myself up onto my knees and felt my way towards the sound, knowing if I found it, I'd just turn around 180 degrees and carefully step to the door. Shutting out the lying signals my eyes were giving me would prevent me from getting distracted by hallucinations, and I could, what, beg for help? What if this was by design? What if I'd been lured here just to burn me? Was this a trap or was this some mistake? Had they meant to dose me with something just to loosen me up for questioning, or was I just tired and losing my grip? It didn't matter. My mind was rapidly drifting off to La La Land, and I needed help. Getting out of this bathroom was my best chance. I could deal with what was happening and who had done it to me later. Squeezing my eyelids shut, I worked my way to standing. I kept my hands out in front of me, swaying them back and forth like I was searching for a light switch in the dark, fumbling for the sink. Nothing. Nothing. Ah, shit. My hands felt like they were suddenly on fire. I couldn't help it. My eyes involuntarily flew open. My hands were sparkling and dripping bright red. Dozens or hundreds of tiny reflective pieces of glass pricked from my hands like I was gearing up for some deranged post-apocalyptic slap fight. What the fuck? The light shushing I'd heard was not a shushing at all. I'd reached into a mound of broken glass pouring forth from an empty frame floating in blank white space before me. A shattered mirror, endlessly pouring out millions of tiny fragments of small reflective lies, rolling and sliding and bouncing off each other. I'm a little blonde girl, blaming her brother for a broken window. I'm a pimple-faced mall rat wannabe in some Hot Topic tee, hair cropped to a bob and dyed jet black, telling my dickhead manager Steve I was late to work to the drive-thru not because I was getting high, but because I had to wrangle my neighbor's dog back into their house. I'm dressed in a crop top and hip-hugging white slacks, jumping a counter to snake as much Adderall as I can grab and tearing out of there like a bat out of hell. I'm all done up with a blonde wig and black cocktail dress, looking like some rich pervert's wet dream version of that little girl by the broken window, flirting with an ambassador whose name and country I've forgotten so another knock can go through his shit in his hotel room. My face, my hair, my clothes, my body kaleidoscope wildly in all the shards of glass, thousands of different me's, all women that existed in some other time, some other universe. Each one is me, each one is not me. The shards of glass illogically spewing from the mirror like a Swarovski store display concocted by an architect who's done way too much cocaine suddenly stopped, leaving just a thin silver frame hanging in the void. Once the shards settled and stopped bouncing and shattering down their chaotic sedimentary pile, things went quiet again. The only noise was the gentle tap tap of the blood dropping from my hands, clutched around each other and pulled in tight to my chest. It was snaking down my arms and dripping off my elbows to the endless white plain that passed for a floor here. I expected little crimson dots to be littering the ground and desperate scarlet handprints that slid backwards away from the pile, but the endless white seemed to pull in the blood. The droplets splat and vanished instantly as they struck the ground. There was no door, no sink, no frame of reference, but the now empty silver frame hanging on a wall that wasn't there over an impossible pile of glass it never could have contained. Now what? I almost laughed. What the hell was I supposed to do now? I thought my brain was misinterpreting signals from my eyes. The blood running down my arms in large crimson rivulets begged to differ. I was still working out my next move when I heard a voice I had not expected to hear again. Wie is daar? Masculine, Dutch, strong diction, no word running into the next, giving the voice an air of fine education. Who is there? He tried switching to English. Slight tinge of British to the Dutch accent, with a hard DZ sound in place of the TH. I kept my mouth shut and backed away from the empty mirror frame. No, wait. It was no longer an empty mirror frame. It was now a closed door, and I realized I was standing in a darkened room. Keys clattered on some end table, muffled by the door and distance. I heard a door smack against its stop, and it was like someone hit the lights in the void I was in. Gone was the endless blank of white, replaced by light leaking from around the frame of the door where that illogical, shattered mirror had hung. I know you're here. The voice seemed to be wandering closer and then further from the door. I always lock my door. Where are you going? Why does this feel familiar? I'll call the police. He was getting nearer the door. I saw a shadow break up that faint line of light pushing past the door that was formerly a mirror. It was last night. I was in Goswin Voss's home office again, standing flat-footed like an idiot. This was wrong. I was supposed to be hiding behind the door. I was supposed to jump him and try to choke him out. He was going to reach for me and against all odds knock the pistol at the small of my back out of the holster. I hadn't known that was possible. I'm still not even sure how he did it. Then he was going to go for the gun. I was going to drop off his back and smack him in the balls before I went for the pistol. He'd grab my leg and drag me towards him. I would pop the safety, kick my free leg out to roll, and put a round in the wall behind him and another just to the right of his nose. Then he'd collapse into my chest like an exhausted lover. That's what was supposed to happen. That's what had happened. Instead, he stepped through the door, silhouetted by light behind him, and looked around for a moment before reaching over and tapping the light switch. My eyes adjusted, and I was standing in Voss's office, behind his neat, darkly finished oak desk, laptop cocked half open in front of me. I'd been swiping files when he'd unexpectedly arrived home. Oh, he sounded disappointed. It's you. Voss stood there, hands still on the light switch, looking at me like he'd caught his wife sneaking about. I didn't know how to respond. This was not how it went. Sorry, I stammered. You shoot me into face, and then you have the nerve to come back here? Sure enough, there was a small round hole on his cheek. The skin was purpled, a nasty bruise running up and around his eye, the wound all puckered in on itself, but there was no blood. You're dead, I finally replied weakly, as if stating the obvious would make it true again. So it would seem, said Voss, although it certainly didn't. And that is where I will leave it for today. Um, Okay, next up we have a story called Gorse 206 by Bendix Ross. Um, she lives in the Pacific Northwest with her husband and five golden pothos plants. An overarching theme of her life has been that things are not as they seem. Driven by a desire for clarity and an existence full of riddles, Ross writes stories that lead readers into the shadows where they must discern for themselves what's truly there. Gorse 206 is her first foray into off-world fiction. And Bendix, I think you were here.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, perfect.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this story came out of my frustration with human behavior and whether if the punishment was to be moved off of this world onto another one, would it make any impact in the way we treat each other? The desuckering crew trekked home from the Gorse 52 fields without much conversation. After a day of forced labor on Frutex, we were too goddamn tired to talk. The light was dimming in the planet's oatmeal sky. You'd think I'd have been used to the permanent cloudless haze that hung in the lower atmosphere, that I'd stop yearning to see my homeworld's golden dwarf sun. But 5 years in exile didn't matter. I would always miss the blue and yellow of a hot Earth day. My back was tight from hours bent low clipping lateral shoots or suckers from the root collars of Frutex's shrubby, pale brown plants. Working vineyards in Earth's Willamette Valley got me pegged early on as a skilled pruner, meaning I was assigned to a lot of desuckering. The dusty path cut through an ocean of shrubbery. There was so much of it, we'd nicknamed the planet Shrub. Bushes with beige leaves and tan, woody stems grew on either side of me, reaching my waist. A light wind moved through the uppermost leaves, making a whistling sound, the shrub squeal. It was a Friday. For everyone's sanity, the human colony had started up our 7-day calendar shortly after arriving on the planet. My plan that evening was to clean up for Shabbat services after work and then head to shul. Like a lot of people living in the colony, I wasn't that religious before the Galactic Interventionist Coalition brought us to Shrub. But now most of us went to synagogue, church, the mosque, or the Buddhist temple. It helped with the massive guilt we carried over losing our home. 5 years ago, when the GIC aliens removed every human from Earth and resettled us in small groups on a bunch of different worlds, they made sure we knew it was because of how badly we shitted up our planet. Nobody was outside when we trudged into our townlet. There was no bustle of adults wheeling barrels of gorse bark and carrying buckets of berries. No children darted among them, laughing and squealing when the grown-ups told them to move. Instead, there was quiet and a strip of gorse rag tied on the handle of every front door. Somebody had gone Petrie. My crew members scattered. I headed straight to the gorse-thatched cottage I shared with my roommate. Wilson had knotted a rag around our front door handle. From the combined living and kitchen area of our bungalow, I could hear Wilson crying in his bedroom. My stomach felt like it was dropping into my knees. I watched the empty village road from the window. Wilson would eventually come out and tell me who'd gone Petrie. Until he did, maybe it hadn't happened. I tried to think of likely Petrie contenders. Frutex sucked as a planet, but most of us had survived our first 5 years in exile. Who would become violent now? Who would risk the consequence of being taken off-world for experimentation? Wilson opened his door. His usual greeting was, "Any luck, Ellie?" That's because I was working on fermenting gorse berries, and Wilson really wanted me to bring alcohol back into his life. Instead, he whispered, "It was Gladys. Gladys." My legs gave way and I crumpled. On my knees, I stared at the gorsewood floorboards, buff-colored like the rest of the planet. Gladys. The information didn't compute. Gladys was the rock of our shrub colony of 3,000 humans. She was also my best friend. Bent and bird-like, about 85 Earth years with wispy white hair, Gladys's assigned task was watching children at the lower kinder. Along with other adults past farming age, Gladys helped teach, entertain, and corral kids while their parents worked in the fields or made stuff out of gorse. But Gladys's unassigned work was much more important. Wilson helped me up to our kitchen table. He sat his large frame on the bench opposite mine, leaning forward against the gorsewood tabletop. She stabbed Harley. Grubby tear tracks marked his face, and water seeped from his green eyes. "Harley's okay," Wilson explained. "It was just a surface cut." "Dementia?" I asked. My chest tightened, like I couldn't breathe. "Did you ever see Gladys show signs of cognitive decline?" I didn't take Wilson's pissed off tone personally. My question was stupid. He stood up to pace back and forth between his bedroom door and our tiny living area. Wilson was always too big for the space Shrub allotted him. Gladys was old but sharp, a former professor of antiquities. When we first got to Shrub, she taught us obscenities in Greek and Latin. My favorite was escortum obscanus vilis. It meant you're a vile, perverted sex worker. Gladys said this was a serious insult in ancient Rome. Wilson was snuffling now as he paced, trying to suppress his sobs. I got up and went to the cooker to boil water for some gorse tea. Not that the tea would do much good. The stuff tasted like oatmeal water, but at least its heat would be soothing. Wilson came back to the table, put his head down, and cried. His big shoulders heaved and joggled his black curls. After a while, he sat up and took a sip of the tea I'd put in front of him. I patted his arm, not crying myself. That would happen later. Exile on Shrub had warped my emotions and expanded my already robust capacity for denial. It happened in the community space, Wilson explained. Everyone was chilling, joking, the usual, he told me. I was talking with my forewoman about next week's harvest. Gladys walked right by us. She came up behind Harley and pulled a shelling blade out of her pocket, stabbed at his lower back. Wilson and I held hands across the table. It didn't seem real. Total slow-mo. I couldn't react. Most adults on Shrub carry their own shelling blade. These small knives were good for husking Gorse 32's pecan-sized fruit. That variety grew everywhere. It was protein rich and an easy snack. Father P was on the other side of the room, over by the speaker's box. He saw Gladys going for Harley and yelled in time for him to move. Wilson pulled his hands from mine, standing up and knocking over his bench. The blockheads were there in 30 seconds. They took her away. The Frutikis, aka blockheads, were the aliens who ran the planet. They always knew when a human did something violent. My guess is they could smell it somehow, even when we didn't draw blood. Wilson sat back down and cupped the mug in his hand. He sipped a few times and said, "She named the planet for fuck's sake." It was true. During our first terrible days on Frutex, Gladys moved us beyond the routines of the agricultural work required by our blockhead overlords. She started Taverna nights, where, once a week, we'd crowd into the community space to hear stories. In the beginning, only Gladys told them, because everyone else was too depressed. Gladys was an expert in ancient languages, like Greek, Latin, Etruscan, and Hebrew. Her narratives were usually classical myths. Sometimes we got a tale from world history, like General Hannibal attacking Rome with his elephants. Eventually, Gladys convinced other people to talk, so the stories grew in variety and became something to look forward to. Her interest in improving life on Shrub made the Frutikis approach Gladys early on about human words for everything on our new world, including a name for the planet. We couldn't speak their language or even hear it, since they communicated on too high a frequency. But the blockheads had the vocal structures to speak at a lower vibration that we could pick up. Their English sounded like an ocean mammal, sort of dolphin-esque. Gladys set up a planet naming contest, but all our entries ended up being disqualified. She felt we'd regret living on Shitworld, Suicidia, or Smegma. Instead, Gladys chose Frutex. It was Latin for shrub and also a Roman insult meaning blockhead. We were already using both words to describe the planet and its indigenous occupants, so the name was a win-win all around. Gladys was big on contests. In our first month, she set up a competition to see who was best at lashing gorse bundles. The contest was supposed to be human judged, but Gladys had to get some blockheads to officiate since none of us gave a shit. Even so, she didn't give up. With story events, potlucks, cook-offs, and whatnot, she made life on a loathsome world tolerable.
Thank you so much, Bendix. Up next is actually our last story in the collection. Please yell at me again if I missed anybody who didn't who I didn't realize had shown up to read. But this story comes from Naomi Daniluk, from hiking Mount Vesuvius and Arenal volcano to hiking Hadrian's Wall and the back sand shores of the Venezuelan coast, to earning a master's in screenwriting from the National Film School of Ireland. Her experiences trekking the world have been a vital muse for Naomi's creative writing endeavors. Consequently, her stories are infused with the exotic and often otherworldly. Naomi will be reading her piece, The Immortal Monks. Show's yours, Naomi.
Thank you. All right, let me pull it up here. I'm just going to read from the beginning of The Immortal Monk. And I time myself, so hopefully I can stick to the time. All right. They came from far and wide to pay alms to the immortal monks, but Tenzo only had to step out the front door of his shack and sit on his stoop. From there, he liked to pilgrim watch, and it was endlessly entertaining, for an endless stream of pilgrims were passing by at any given moment. Some came from out of sight, where the beginning of the line of gray statues with painted red robes was said to start, but where Tenzo had never been. All he knew was weathered skulls and carved smiles, far as he could see. Why go anywhere, his mother scolded when once he had complained, when all the world carries itself to your door? Tenzo saw the logic, even as a young child, and from then on felt very special and important that he lived along the middle of the line, where the whole world passed by. For everyone, at least once in their lives, would walk with the immortal monks to receive their collective blessings. The statues carried stone alms bowls in stone hands. The greater the offering, the greater the blessing. Most only walked with them for a little while. They were poor, elderly. They had nothing for which to repent. Those who came from out of sight, those were the ones who really needed blessings. A loved one was seriously ill, or they themselves were nearing rebirth. Because Tenzo was a child, he could ask questions like, why? Pester them now, his grandmother used to say, before you have to wait to be my age, and then you'll be too tired to be curious. Where are you from? What for are you paying alms? Do your feet hurt? Why suffer when you could have some fresh sandals? Selling sandals was what Tenzo was supposed to be pestering the pilgrims about, but since most said no with a swatting look like he was a biting fly, he asked the other questions first. He learned all sorts of things just outside his own door with the world passing by. He learned that there were great mountains towards the beginning of the line of immortal monks, where there were birds as big as men, and the men there wore whole animals on their backs to stay warm. He learned that some were from the south, even though they walked from the north, because they had traveled to start all the way at the first statue. He learned that people from the south thought they were the most pious because they had to travel the furthest from where the monks finally walked into the infinite waters. And there were fish the size of houses. He learned that most adults did not know much more about life than a child like he did. That people will walk for days on blisters to try and pray back a love lost. Those inevitably started with a sack almost too heavy to lift and paid one coin and a prayer into each alms bowl they passed. By the time they got to Tenzo's stretch of statues, their backs were twisted and spasming, their legs hobbled, and their feet were bloody. Their sacks were lighter, though. Do you think you will get to the end? Tenzo would ask. I hope so. This is all my alms savings. I have nothing more. Would you like a fresh pair of sandals then? Others did not walk from the beginning, but would come from the east or west and make a great show of offering all their wealth into the bowl of just one statue. They would collapse to the ground and grovel at the stone feet in a spectacle of reverence. These pilgrims Tenzo could not sell sandals to, but the sandals were just the excuse to live beside the immortal monks, so selling them did not really matter. Every day, sun or storm, Tenzo's mother would dress in pilgrim robes with her hair down and hood up so that the neighbors who sold snacks and boiled stream water would not recognize her, slip out of their shack and into the line. At each alms bowl, she put in one coin and palmed two. When she returned, her sack was twice as heavy. This was the real reason they lived there. At night, she would sneak out and empty entire bowls, but only in the rain, because night was the most dangerous. Pilgrims returning after they did not get the blessings they had asked for and wanting their alms offering back. Drunks and thieves and gamblers from the nearby shanty town. It was not uncommon to see blood or a dead body in the morning. His mother would drag the body off with some neighbor, and Tenzo would be made to wash the statue. Everyone who lived beside the immortal monks could agree, death was not good for business. Sometimes pilgrims died of natural causes, heat stroke, relief of offering their last coin, a broken heart. His grandmother had told Tenzo this, though a heart not yet broken cannot comprehend such an invisible injury. Only just the other day, while Tenzo was filling the time by pilgrim pestering, he spotted a figure in the distance, shuffling along the line. At each statue, the figure dropped to the ground where he lay, belly down at the monk's feet. This is what pilgrims would do who had no coins left to give, but more blessings still to ask for. As the figure approached, Tenzo saw that it was a man, wearing thick robes that were all ripped along the front from his prostrating, and so covered in ochre dust that he could not tell what color they had been. There was a heaviness about him, and though he was not nearly as old as his grandmother had been, he looked it. 50 pilgrims must have passed in the time it took the man to reach his statue. Tenzo had been waiting for him. "Where are you from?" he pestered. "You are asking," the man rasped, "the wrong question." "What should I ask you then? Forget sandals." "Ask this. What horrible acts did you commit to earn the coin with which you were trying to buy redemption?" Tenzo was surprised to hear a pilgrim admit that they had been horrible, but he was not about to give up the opportunity to hear the answer. "What horrible acts did you commit?" It had been one of those adult answers that sounded like a riddle that would never be solved since the man had collapsed right there at Tenzo's feet. His mother had rushed over, but it was not to come to Tenzo's aid or the pilgrims, though he reached out to her with his dying breath. It was to slip a ruby ring off his pinky finger before the body was carted away. This was nearly as shocking as a man speaking his last words to Tenzo. Not that his mother pocketed the ring, but that it had been a ruby ring. Everyone knew that because the immortal monks wore red robes, that no one was allowed to wear that blessed color in their presence. But it did not matter, because his mother would not wear it. She would hide it, along with the rest of their riches. For what, Tenzo did not know. Tenzo's mother had so much gold that they did not have to live in a shack, but she said no one will rob a shack, and buried the coins in the dirt floor and covered the stash with a simple grass mat. Tenzo had no real concept of how much he had buried until one morning he went outside and found that one of the dead bodies was hers. The ground was foggy with evaporating dew. Perhaps it had rained in the night, and she thought it safe to empty a bowl or two. Perhaps the fog was too thick to see that there was already somebody there, doing just that. Tenzo was an orphan now. His father had died when he was very young, though it occurred to him that he did not know how, and his grandmother had died sitting in her chair out front of their shack, jubilantly criticizing the passing pilgrims 2 summers past. Tenzo could only remember her gap-toothed smile and that she smelled of incense ash and fried sweet dumplings. Tenzo was too small to lift his mother from the base of the statue, but a kind neighbor offered. They had moved in next door because they wanted to lead a more pious life in the shadow of the immortal monks. His mother had said, "More for me." There were no valuables to remove from his mother before they took her away. No earrings, no bangles, no silks, though she could have afforded them all. She had not wanted to draw any attention to her wealth. "You can pray over her body if you want," the pious neighbor said, "but it is only a husk. Your mother lived her life so reverently, she is sure to have an esteemed rebirth. She is very fortunate, for there is no holier place to die than at the feet of an immortal monk." Tenzo thought that this was a curious thing to say, as his mother had always called the bodies bleeding at the monks' feet fools. Tenzo went back inside and peeked through the crack between 2 of the shack's slats. He watched as the neighbors put his mother's body in their body-removing wheelbarrow and carted her out of sight. All of a sudden, he felt the need to sit down on the worn grass mat. It started with curiosity. Tenzo peeled the mat up just a corner and brushed the dirt away until he saw the glint of a coin. There, beside it, another. He had no trowel, so he used the wooden sole of a sandal to dig. He dug for what felt like hours, stopping only for a snack of dried fruit and rice sticks, and then digging again. Whenever he thought, just one more, he'd find 2. He dug until he fell asleep digging. When he woke, it was beside a pile of coins nearly as large as him. That's where I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Naomi. Okay, those are our stories we're going to be reading for you today. There are 2 other stories in the collection that are well worth checking out. Now Here We See a Wretched Thing by E.N. Welsh and Rabbit Flesh by Anthony C. Ermy. So if you do pick up a copy, which I hope you'll do, please read those stories as well. They're wonderful. We'll transition into kind of a brief Q&A. If anybody wants to ask authors questions, I'll go ahead and start just to kind of break the ice for people. I'm
You want
curious.
to pin me? Sorry.
Oh, yes, I can unpin you.
For the
You don't want to stare at
Q&A.
yourself the whole time?
Yeah.
Okay. Uh, yes. So my question for each of the authors is what's your typical writing process? Do you sit down with a drink? Do you follow a regular timing? Like, how do you get into sort of the zone as it is? And feel free to just jump in.
All right, I'll start off. I usually like roll out of bed and start writing because I'm not a morning person and I don't want to do that, but life keeps lifing. And I've just learned that if I don't get something done in the morning, then by the time I actually have time in the evening, my brain isn't functioning anymore. So I sort of manically work in the morning and then hope that I'll have more time the rest of the day. And then sometimes I do. And I'll just write for like 8 hours because I'm not sure whether I'll have time again. So it's kind of like haphazard, but I try to make sure I write every single day. Otherwise, I feel like I lose the thread of the story I'm working on. So it's pretty important, just even if it's a little bit.
I excuse me. I find that I tend to theoretically want to begin my day with writing and like write for a solid 2 hours or something like that. But I think what ends up happening with me is I just end up like sitting down to write for a little bit at night and get hyperfixated and end up staying until ungodly hours of the morning, hyperfixated on my writing, which is not, I think, a good way to do it, but it seems to be what happens. Like, I don't know. Um, yeah, so I it's kind of like one of those things I always tell my own creative writing students is like, oh, you really need to be have dedication. You really need to set a schedule for your writing, and I'm really bad at doing that myself.
Do as I say, not as I do.
Um, it's pretty different for me because I have a demanding day job. So for me, I always write on the weekends. During the week, I'm just kind of gnawing at an idea and I run around either sticking ideas in my phone about it or I'm plastering my desk, my writing desk, not my work desk, with sticky notes. And then, I'll do some writing during the week, but mostly it's the weekends I have time to really go back and pull it all together. So luckily my day job is writing. So I'm always flexing that muscle, just not on what I want to do. And so then I have this kind of weird process to keep the other going during the week to get me to the weekend to do the actual writing.
I guess one trick that I have is beginning writing with rewriting. When I do my rewriting, that kind of gives me a lot of momentum. And in rewriting, you kind of look for what's not working, what's boring, what is trite, and I rework it until I can make the sentence kind of sing for me. And yeah, I think that's the most compelling for me. The first draft is it's like pulling teeth. It's not fun, but the second and third draft of anything I'm working on, that's the most rewarding for me, I think. But I work when I can. I do have a day job as well, so it's mostly mornings and some weekends and wherever I can find the time. But you need downtime too. You need downtime where you can think discursively, free associate, daydream. It all goes together, yin and yang. The work and just the non-work are essential to each other.
That's actually like Leah, I feel everything you just said, but especially like needing downtime. I went from full-time to part-time a couple of years ago to focus on my writing, and it just meant that there was no like stopping it. And I found myself definitely getting into overworking and over rewriting, every time I had a free moment, I was like, but I love writing. This is what I want to do. And I wasn't allowing myself daydreaming and stuff. So now I'm like forcing myself to have days away from my laptop. I'm making my husband confiscate my laptop. And it's actually helping me be a better writer.
Great. Um, Anybody else in the audience? Any questions for the authors here today?
I have a story.
Go for it.
Keegan texted me, you know how he cut off? He said that lightning hit. He's like, he texted me, I think lightning hit. And then he sends me pictures of the tree outside his house on fire and a
Oh no.
live wire like dancing around the streets. So he had a very good excuse why he went. But I've never seen like an actual tree light on fire from lightning. But apparently that just happened. So
Well, yeah, that's a good excuse to step away. All right. I work with a lot of folks in the Midwest, so I feel like I've started to try and work on what I call the Midwest pause to let people have a chance to speak. But not hearing any other questions, I'll just go ahead and wrap us up.
I have a question for
Oh, go
Bendix
ahead.
actually. So I noticed your story with the blockheads, the fruitikis. Is that what they were called? Fruitikis?
Yeah.
Yeah. So part of that reminded me. I was wondering where you drew inspiration from. Part of this premise of the story reminded me of the day the Earth stood still, where the premise for that story was that the intergalactic sort of council that Klaatu comes from had given complete sovereignty to like these robots that will punish any kind of aggression. So I definitely like heard notes of that, like how the Fruitikis always knew if humans were aggressive, and sort of would punish humans for aggression. So yeah, I was just wondering where you drew inspiration from. Sort of what inspired the story.
It was inspired by just being very, very angry because I wrote it last fall and just being very angry at just all sorts of things in the world and the way we are so violent, we are trashing the planet. And it came from that. And I didn't think about that's interesting. The day that you're so I didn't think about that specifically. It, it I think there's lots of books about aliens coming here and doing what they do with us, but the one that there was a Twilight Zone episode called "To Serve Man," and the aliens actually came and tricked us and said, "We're coming to help you," and they got rid of all of our problems, and then they actually ended up wanting to eat us.
yeah.
So, I think, there's always the idea, well, it'd be very interesting if they came here and what would happen. But the frustration and anger driving the story was just, I'm so sick of the way we treat each other and the way we treat the planet. And it was, so the aliens were just like, well, what if someone tried to fix it? And it came from outside.
Thank you.
Sure.
Great. I'll do another pause. Any other questions?
It's so hot here in Ithaca, and I'm in an upstairs apartment, and so I just feel like my brain is soup in my head. That's I can't think of anything. I love the heat. And one of the reasons I love it is I can't work. I just have to kind of like take it easy. So it makes my type A like kind of slow down a little, which is what I need. But it's hot up here.
All right. Well, we'll set you free from from it, Naomi. Um, just really quickly, I want to do a couple of acknowledgments. Naomi, thank you for giving me the opportunity to edit this collection. I really had a lot of fun
Thank you for
doing it.
doing it. Thank you.
And also thank you for running Ink Alchemy and giving so many emerging and lesser known authors a chance to have some space to publish. Thank you to each of the authors, both here today, those who couldn't make it, and everyone that I had to send rejections to. So many wonderful stories came across the metaphorical desk, and I just really had a lot of fun reading all of these. And also thank you to the readers, everyone who showed up to support to support indie authors today. Those who buy a copy, just really appreciate giving all of us a chance. And with that, we'll wrap up. Thanks, everyone.